Hey y'all! Let's talk about XLR cables in home audio. And historically, XLR or balanced cables have been used in like studio and live sound to try to reduce any sort of noise getting introduced into the stream from microphones and guitar pickups and those sorts of things going across the studio to the mixing boards and those sorts of applications, or live sound, on stage, microphones and stuff going back to a mixing board that may be halfway across the auditorium or the stadium or wherever the venue is, where the guy mixing the sound needs to be away from the stage so that he's mixing it from a location where the audience is hearing it. And in those applications, nothing will beat XLR or even be usable. There's so much signal loss in a single-ended RCA connection over a long distance that it's just not reliable to be used, nor is it quiet enough. It just can pick up every little bit of noise in these long lengths of cable. It starts acting like a radio antenna. You start picking up radio stations and all kinds of crazy stuff. And up until now, I've been using RCAs, single-ended outputs, because I'm running, less than 2 meters of cable, probably not even 1 meter of cable. And in a lot of cases, I'm running RCA cables this long. And so there's no need for noise reduction. And my advice to people have been, just keep the cable short and you're not going to have a problem. So one of the things that got me interested in kind of going down this balanced audio path is I started messing around with tape head preamps. And this one in particular is a out of production unit that was made by Bottlehead that is called a Repro. It was their top of the line, commercial quality, made for, commercial audio uses, like in a studio or that sort of thing, to run the output of a tape deck. And it has, let me flip this over to show you, it's got all sorts of tubes and stuff on the back of it. So this complement of tubes here is the voltage amplification and the gain for the initial amplification of the audio signal coming off the tape head. And these tape head preamps need a ton of gain. And so this one is rated at approximately 50 dBs of gain. And I'm still trying to understand, wrap my head around all this stuff. They're saying that these RCA outs are negative 10 dB. And put in the comments below, what if you know what that's related to. I'm still trying to kind of learn about this and understand what's going on. So they have these rated at negative 10 dBs, and then they have the XLR outs over here after another gain stage and these balancing transformers, or the line outs. They have these rated at plus 5 dB. So there's 15 dBs of gain across these two outputs. And when I hook these RCAs up to the input of my 2A3 amp, which has 100K input impedance, so it's not like a hard load to drive, I'd have to run the amp almost wide open to get to normal, 85 dB in the room volume level. And I'm using that same amp with my phono stage, which is fairly hot. It's probably got at least 5 dBs over line in gain. But I'm also using it with like a DAC and a CD DAC that have just standard consumer line out. And when I'm using those outputs into this amp, I'm getting this, to get to my normal listening volume, which is 80 to 85 dB kind of range, I'm at like halfway to maybe 5/8 on the volume knob, not wide open. So I'm not sure why the RCA outs on this are such low level that it's requiring more gain out of the amplifier than like a CD deck does. I tried hooking these XLR outputs, which are hotter than these, and I used these XLR balancing transformers. Here they are installed in this color preamp that I'm selling a customer that wanted some XLR inputs. And they're these Lundell transformer modules that he sells. And here's a close-up of what they look like installed in the amp. And then the end result was that when I'm using the XLR out from this with the one-to-one balancing transformers, that now I can run the amp at 40 to 50% volume to get the right sound pressure level in the room, and the whole thing just sounds way more dynamic. And so, doing some research, I looked at even my DAC. Like I said, I end up with like 5/8 on the output, and when I read the specs, it's saying there's 2 volts RMS out on the RCAs, and that there's 4 volts on the XLR outputs. And so when I had these same balancing transformers that are in this preamp now, when I had them just kind of breadboard wired up to my 2A3 amp, and I was just using I made these little jumper cables here that had a RCA jack, and then these 2 leads plugged onto the output jacks on that XLR module, that now I'm getting the same point on the volume knob that my phonostage has, that's like 45 to 50% volume is all I ever need. And it honestly did sound a little cleaner too. So what I'm kind of starting to understand is these XLR outputs, like on this device or on my DAC, have a higher signal level than the single-ended do. And that being the case, you're going to have better signal-to-noise ratio through the cable than you would with the single-ended, because you've got a hotter signal going through it. And then, like I said, with these balancing transformers being one-to-one, the amp itself is getting a hotter signal. And it's, trying to like come up with an analogy, but I know like on reel-to-reel tape, when you're doing a recording, if you record in the red, really hot tape, as long as you're not getting into more dBs gain than the tape can handle and starts distorting, you're going to have a higher signal-to-noise ratio, and you probably are never even going to hear any tape hiss, because the signal is hot enough on the tape where the dBs between the signal and the noise, the delta is so large that you're not going to hear it. And that's because you don't have to amplify this signal, because as you amplify the signal more, the noise gets louder too, if that makes sense. And that's kind of what I think is going on here. And it's one of the reasons I think that my phonostage sounds as good as it does, is because it does have a lot of gain. And I've had a couple of people, complain, it's just the output of this preamp's too hot, and I'm having to turn the volume way down compared to my other source. And it's like, that shouldn't be a complaint, because that's going to give you less noise and more source being hotter like that. Does that make sense? I mean, I'd love to hear in the comments what you guys have experienced using balanced, cables and XLR outputs on devices into amplifiers, and what you've experienced. Because a lot of people seem to be going to using balanced stuff. And to me, it didn't make any sense, given the cables aren't long enough to really have a problem. But I think there's more to it than that. And one of the things, again, I was talking to Holger at Earnhardt Audio, who is the importer of these Lundell transformers and makes these little modules, I think having 1-to-1 makes sense on the inputs because it's already pretty hot. But I think if you're going to do an output module transformer thing, like if I was going to put them in my phono stage, or I was going to put them on, something like this color preamp, you really want it to be some more like 2-to-1, like the DAC is showing, because if it's at the same signal level as the RCA, you're not gaining anything. And so that's something I'm going to be exploring here in the future. If I'm going to do an option to have XLR or balanced out on my phono stages, that there needs to be a real advantage to it. And the problem I'm kind of seeing is, and maybe it's getting better, but in the past there wasn't really a standard per se on home audio balanced in and outs. And I'm trying to understand the whole, impedance on the XLR jacks on an amplifier. And people start talking about, the 600 ohm standard. But then I look at the specs on a lot of these amplifiers that have balanced inputs, and they're saying that it's like 50K. So I don't really understand what this whole 600 ohm thing is about, when I know that the DCR of the transformer doesn't have anything to do with the impedance that the circuit and the signal seeing, because output transformers are the same way. Some of them, like those 3.5K Tango output transformers that have 8 ohms, 3.5K, the DCR on the output winding is almost nothing. And then on the primary winding, the DCR is like 80 ohms. And that's got nothing to do with the impedance, because it's reflected from whatever the speaker is back through the transformer, and that's what the tube sees. And I think that's going to be the same thing true with a preamp, where if the amp has 100K input impedance, if you got a 2-to-1 output transformer multiplication for the XLR, if it's a 2-to-1 step up, then it's going to be seeing a 25K load, which most of these tube amps will be able to handle. I know they can't handle driving 600 ohms. So I'm still trying to figure this out. And some of this just has been really baffling to me, and it didn't make a lot of sense. But experimenting with it, I'm starting to understand more about how all of this is working. And the whole thing of DCR doesn't equal impedance thing can get really confusing. So anyway, I'm going to be diving down this whole balanced audio thing. And like I said, I've discovered through using this device that there is an advantage. And by also the output on my DAC being hotter on the XLRs, and like on this, the gain's adjustable. And like on my DAC, you can pick 4 volts or 5 volts on the XLR. You don't have that option on the single-ended. So you can make the output signal hotter on a lot of these devices if the amplifier or whatever you're driving needs a hotter signal. The other thing I've thought about doing is, like on my 2A3, for the first time, I'm going to put these XLR jacks and the transformers. I'm going to mount them in the amplifier. I'm actually thinking that it might make sense to take another pair of these and make a little box that has XLR in, RCA out, have some little short cables, that are maybe this long, that have the connection between the XLR box and the amplifier, so they can be used with different devices. And let me know what you think about whether you'd be interested in buying some little box like that did, just a little passive box that had 2 XLR jacks with a couple of RCA outs with some really high quality Lundell transformers in them that you know are not going to degrade the sound. So anyway, I hope you find this interesting. I'm, again, no expert. And this is something I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around. I've looked online and it doesn't seem like a lot of information about how all this works. If you've seen really good links or videos, put them in the comments and I'll go watch them, try to educate myself more, and then hopefully I can come back and explain in better, more basic language, like actually what's going on. So anyway, I think that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing to the channel. Thanks to you Patreon supporters, members of the channel, folks that give me donations at my website. It helps me kind of keep all this stuff, buying this kind of expensive stuff to show you guys, like, don't waste your money on this, buy this, this works, that doesn't, that sort of thing. I really appreciate that. I mean, that really helps make all this possible. So, until the next video, have a nice day.